you can automate all this stuff, right? You can automate the booking process, you can automate the quoting process, but you can't automate the uh-oh moments, right? You can't automate, hey, I got a problem and I got to solve this today. That's done with people.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sustainable Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Chris. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Chris Condon, the founder and CEO of Aircon, and one of our products is Captain Cargo.
Okay. Chris, what is Aircon?
Aircon is really a platform that allows small to medium-sized freight forwarders to compete at scale and really connecting all the different dots around the globe so they can really meet their customers where their customers are at that particular time.
Tell me, Chris, what's the genesis story behind Aircon? What made you wake up one morning and say, I think I'll start Aircon?
Yeah, it really comes down that with my inability to compete as a small or medium-sized freight forwarder, I was running a forwarding company based out of the US, 4 offices, roughly 100 employees, and I can compete on every mode of transportation, air, ocean. I can compete on customs. I can compete on, the four-wall environment or the fulfillment side of it. But I struggled with air freight, and air freight is really the mode of transportation where it's just more exciting. There's more money in it. It's more complex than most. And I wasn't able to compete. And I wasn't able to compete because I didn't either have the buying power, I wasn't able to consolidate, or I just didn't have the network to solve it where these customers were going that I needed to go. So the idea of Aircom was really to support and become that stopgap for the areas where customers don't have either the expertise, they don't have the volume, or they just don't even know where to start to look, right? So we were providing that solution for them, not to replace the freight forwarder, not to remove the freight forwarder, but really to amplify what they're doing, because we truly believe that people do business with people. And if we can remove the friction, we can continue to do that.
Okay. And what has surprised you most in that transition from being a freight forwarder to now running Aircon?
The risk rewards standpoint would probably be the biggest one. We are very transactional type business, right? We focus a lot on the per shipment or per transaction versus trying to find what the solution is long term. And I've said this throughout my entire career is, well, let's chase the account, let's not chase the shipment, right? So if we got to lose here to win there, overall for winning, who cares, right? But I found that most, as a freight forwarder, that treated me very well, right? Because I was always talking about solutions and the pain point of our shipper or the consignee, like what problem am I solving? And I didn't have to make money on everything I did. I just had to make money overall. But as an air freight forwarder, it's very, very similar stuff, right? It's price, it's timing, it's network. And everybody is focused on, not everybody, a lot of people are focused on that transaction, right? So how do I win this particular shipment, particularly when they start getting larger, right? When you start getting into 3+ tons or some specialty stuff, like it's all about how much money do I make? And that, for me, that's been a struggle from a software provider, if you will, that they were looked at as a cost, not a value to the thing. So we've done some things obviously to combat that. That's how we introduced Captain Cargo, is to reduce the friction in terms of getting the access to the rates and getting to that knowledge. And then starting things that are new is really the biggest challenge. Is we're trying to be a part of something that people don't really understand yet. Whereas a freight forwarder, there's lots of history we can look at and, hey, what works, what doesn't work, who's moving this, how are they moving it? Like we can learn from other people. What we're trying to do, there's just a lot of bits and pieces that we got to try to sew together to really make it seamless and then frictionless.
Okay. And what problems are you solving for your customers?
Well, so be able to compete at scale or compete in general, right? So you have access to rates, which again, people talk about rates a lot. That is the main reason why people say no, right? Hey, you're too high or whatnot. But what we found is that rate is really secondary in air freight. So rate in ocean, rate in truck is absolutely a priority. In air freight, it's really about time and options. A lot of people believe that air freight is a function of moments, right? Hey, my line's down, or, I need it here because of this. But the reality of it is there's lots of reasons why people move via air. It could be security reasons. It could be timing, could be part of it, but it could be the fact that, hey, I just need it there faster than ocean can get it there for me. Like we move corrugated from the Midwest in the US to India every week. We have 26 kids twice a week from the Midwest to thing, and it's corrugated. They move it via air because of the condensation and whatnot. So there's lots of reasons why people move air. And what we found is that speed matters more in the quoting process than it does in the actual transit time. And then the knowledge and the probability of that transit time being accurate, which is really our third, bring this up a little bit, because that's really our third agent that we're building. So we're doing a quoting agent. We're going to do a booking agent next, which is not that exciting to me just because there's lots of different players in that market or in that field. And so we're trying to figure out how to either partner with or JV, build, buy. We're trying to figure that all out yet. But the third agent, which is really the exception agent, is really the cool stuff, right? It's really the what if scenarios that happen while we're sleeping, right? So as a passenger flying on an aircraft, right, if the plane gets delayed or you miss your connection, obviously you're rebooked, and if it doesn't meet your requirements, you have the options to pay more on another flight. But you're really doing that in real time, right? You're doing it, if you're whatever airport you're at, you're talking to someone to get that result. Well, cargo doesn't talk, right? So when you're sleeping, the airline will rebook it to the next available flight, but maybe that doesn't meet your need, right? Maybe you're a manufacturer that you need it here by tomorrow or the next day by noon. So a 3-day transit doesn't work, right? I can't wait 3 days, and you're willing to pay more to meet your need from either, again, your manufacturing or your retail standpoint. So the agent will give those options or those solutions to the person that it actually affects. And I think it's a double benefit. One is the freight forwarder doesn't have to have that difficult conversation of, your cargo got delayed and your next option is in 3 days. I know that doesn't meet your need, but this is what we have. And then two, it gives the power of what the options are to the buyer or the one that's spending their money, right? So maybe 3 days is okay. So leave it as is and no harm, no foul. But not, I gotta move it. Okay, here's your options, move it. Yeah, I don't care if it costs me $1 million more, because it's going to cost me 10 million if I don't have it there by this particular time, right? So it removes friction in providing that service, because at the end of the day, forwarders' value is about having knowledge and having a solution to the buyer's problem, right?
Yeah.
Because if not, you can go to direct to the steamship line, you can go direct with the airline or your customs broker. But the value is really giving that knowledge on all the different what ifs and scenarios when stuff does hit the fan.
Sure. Yeah. And why is it that small and medium freight forwarders often get squeezed out of the market?
There's a lot of different reasons, I think, mainly because they get gobbled up. So part of the motion of what companies do is they grow to a certain point, and then they either can't grow any further, or they just get bought up because they have a great idea or a great process. And you see that in all industries. It's not a freight forwarding specific industry, but in freight forwarding, you see it all the time. Obviously, Kuehne+Nagel's bought a bunch, DSV, Maersk. They've all merged all these other companies together as their method of growing their business. But every time that happens, there's a plethora of companies that start up, right? Because again, people do business with people, and maybe I don't like the direction or the leadership of that particular company, so I'm going to do it on my own, or I'm going to go join another company that does their own. And then your customers don't always follow you, but if you have a solution that they trust you and they have a bad experience, they're going to come to you. It's an interesting question, because I think about this often, is how do we help ensure that our customers try to keep as many customers as they possibly can. Partly is having them have the ability to meet their need where they're at. So a lot of our customers are truckers, right? So they're truck people in the US, right? They have assets, and 99.99% of their customers ship truck. But that one time they need an air freight shipment, if you can't support them, they're going to go to somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Not on any faults of their own or yours, but they're going to go to somewhere else. Oh, that's a crack, right? How is their service? How are their rates, right? So that customer that they went to, or that forwarder that they went to try to do their air freight, now has the opportunity to pull that freight away from the trucker, if you will. So part of the solution is to give everybody all the tools and whatnot that they need to try to keep their customers inside their house, so they don't even have to go look outside their four walls.
Mm. Yeah, 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 makes sense. And this is the Sustainable Supply Chain podcast. So what's the connection between one thing and the other?
Yep, couple things. One, through consolidation and maximizing the capacity of aircraft. The aircraft is moving one way or the other. Obviously, most aircrafts are moved through passenger going from A to B, and the cargo just happens to right along with it. So if we can maximize that capacity, we're making sure that we're not creating more need for more planes in the air, right? Because once that plane leaves, that capacity is out of the market. You can't resell it, can't reuse it, it's gone, right?
Yep.
So how do we maximize that? And our technology, part of the technology that we're doing is how do we maximize that across multiple airports and across multiple airlines, right? Because everybody has a master, right? When you're working, if you're an airline, your master is your airline, your routes, your P&L, if you will. And if you're a trucker, obviously your routes, same. So part of the idea or solution that we have in terms of the AI predictive analytics is I have freight coming out of, let's say, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, going to London. Most people will go Milwaukee to Chicago, Chicago to London, but sometimes those routes are full, right? Or the capacities are full. And so how do you predict that? And then what is the probability of, hey, going over Cincinnati, for example, that maybe BA has 2 flights a week, during the summer months that out of Cincinnati. So you still can meet the customer's demand by the rate and the transit time. Now we, as you book it as part of our booking agent, is we will re-quote it and re-look at the network. What is the capacity? What is the probability? And then how does the freight forwarder make more money, right? So in that scenario of London from Chicago over Cincinnati, that rate may be 50 cents less a kilo, right? So if that's the case, if you still meet the customer's demands, now you have an opportunity to make more money because you know what the customer is, you know what the transit time is requirement, and now you just got to find the best way to do it for you to make money. Again, adding value to the freight forwarder. And then if you can consolidate, which is really our long-term play and why we started Aircon in the first place, was now we can go to these 5 or 6 freight forwarders and says, hey, every Thursday you guys are shipping to London out of Chicago. What if I can reduce your rate by 30%? Same transit time, less damage, and now we're maximizing the space in the actual aircraft, and there's nothing left behind, right? It's not getting bumped to the next flight, because if it's overage, the tech says, okay, instead of American, put this on BA. Instead of BA, put this on Qatar or Virgin, whatever the scenario is. But again, the intent is to maximize the capacity, which will reduce, in theory, the rate to the freight forwarder, which in theory then reduces that rate back to the shipper and buyer, which ultimately affects the consumer, us buying it.
And you mentioned AI. How is that useful in air freight today?
A lot of different ways. We're using it today in our Captain Cargo. We're using the LLM, which is the large language modeling, which basically allows email to be kind of the down and dirty, if you will, of the API or EDI from back in the day, right? It allows us to structure the data in a manner that we can digest it. We can run different analytics behind that in terms of, again, capacity rates and on-time probability. So that's one way. The other way that we're using is to predict future rates and predict future capacity, right? A lot of people think that air freight is so complex, which it is. Like there's 12 to 15 people that touch each freight from quoting to delivery, right? From the warehouse, the trucking. It is complex. There's no doubt about it. But it is very predictable, right? There's variables that we can see in patterns that we've seen from a predictability standpoint. And so as we connect all these dots, that data from AI becomes more predictable, right? And more accurate the more data we have. And to be fair, there's very little data on air freight. We're VC backed, right? I pitch to investors saying, hey, give us money because we want to build this really cool thing, which is true. But it's difficult to share the story on how big air freight is, right? The data is just not out there. Like you can look at IATA, which at best is probably 30% accurate at best. There's prepaid, there's CAS. Like IATA will show you that out of the US for cargo, Anchorage, Alaska is the number one airport. Well, we all know most of the freight doesn't start and or finish in Alaska, right? It's a landing spot for many airlines, particularly in this case FedEx, where cargo starts and stops out of there, right? The other issue with data is that people hold on to it like it's their pride and joy. Like so the CAS data or the IATA data will tell you airport to airport, but it won't tell you that, hey, this came out of Juarez, Mexico, going to London, right? 29% of all air freight goes to London out of the US, which is also kind of interesting for me to look at.
Oh.
But we all know it doesn't stay in London, right?
Hmm.
Now, Brexit obviously affected some of this stuff, but the passengers go to London. Out of the US, 29% of the passengers transit through London, right? So the cargo just follows that flow, which is it's interesting to understand, but a lot of people outside the industry don't get that, right? They don't understand like, oh, well, it's just 3 lanes, right? US to London, US to South Africa, US to Australia, you got it covered. Well, US to China, you got it covered. But it's much more nuanced than that in terms of wide body, narrow body. Do you build it up? And then you add screening to it, right? It's like all the TSA requirements post 9/11 just adds complexity. And we're trying to solve that and remove that friction so people can compete.
Good thing there's not a lot of changes in things like tariffs to complicate things even further.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I anytime there's chaos in the world, COVID to tariffs to whatever, the freight forwarder win. Logistics folks just win, right? And they win they win because it's not normalized, right? So they
Yeah.
have to be creative on how to build things or how to move things. Because at the end of the day, we still need our stuff, right? At the end of the day, we still need to eat, we still need to cut our hair, those type of things, right? So I think the tariffs actually what we've seen is buyers have added more quoting to their process. So as they're trying to reduce their rate because of tariffs, now they're trying to reduce, get some money out of the freight forwarder, which again, if we all have the same knowledge, that's kind of hard to do. All you can play with margin, right? In the ocean world, that's all you really can do is play with margin a little bit. But in air freight, you can do a lot of cool things. Right? Again, you can consolidate, reduce your total cost. You can go over different ports that may add 2 days transit, but reduces your cost for X. You might be able to use a parcel carrier like a UPS, DHL, or FedEx that packages takes priority. So it may be a 7-day transit versus a 2-day transit. So again, other options to give that power back to the buyer, which is why I think Aircon is so special, is that we're trying to give you that knowledge so you can meet your customer where they're at.
Okay. And do you think sustainability mandates are driving innovation in freight, or are you finding yourself having to drag the industry along?
That's a tough question. So in some ways, I think it is. In some ways, I think it's not. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to cost, right? And what people are willing to pay for it. And the governments need to get involved and either mandate it from the airlines. In this particular case, either mandate from the airlines or mandate it from the truckers. No different from the steamship line as they mandated, the bunker fuel and whatnot. So the government starts mandating it to where it's not a unfair advantage for these airlines, then I think it will drive it to sustainability. But until then, it's going to be more of a how important it is to the buyer, right? So again, it always goes back to the buyer who's willing to pay. If the cost from Dallas to London is, let's say, $1, but the fuel cost is higher, so now I got to charge $1.10 because that's important to me. You got to sell it for $1.10. But the buyer, if it's not important to them, they're going to go, instead of American, they're going to go with British Airways because it's 10 cents cheaper a kilo, right? So we got to level the playing field in my mind. And the only way to do that is through regulations, which, there's pros and cons to that as well, right? So just like everything else, there's a yin and a yang and a positive and negative everything. So I believe we will get there, but it will get there because of the people in general will force them to say, hey, I'm willing to pay more for it today to do that. And then the prices will come down at scale. That's kind of how I look at it.
Fair enough. And how do you see the role of freight forwarders evolving over the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, that's an interesting question too. I think that they're in a lot of ways, depending on how you look at it, you'll see them kind of dissipate in terms of size. When I say size, number of people, but I see them creating more value, right? So a more customer oriented versus transactional oriented, right? So back to my point where people do business with people, you can automate all this stuff, right? You can automate the booking process, you can automate the quoting process, but you can't automate the uh-oh moments, right? You can't automate, hey, I got a problem and I got to solve this today. That's done with people. The automation is stuff that's done, that is things that are done on a consistent basis or repetition. So again, how do we all book an airway bill? That's all pretty standard, right? We do whatever, right? How do we quote? We all think we have a special sauce, right, in terms of how to win business, but at the end of the day, it's all about the same. So the problem comes in, or the solution is when things do hit the fan or things go wrong, how do you adapt and make the customer feel and have the ability to meet their need, right? And that's how customers become loyal to you, right? It's also a problem I see how in today's world of all these different freight forwarders, the airline reps have reduced their number of touch points, if you will. So like a lot of these small freight forwarders, they don't even know who to call, right? If it gets stuck in London, and I use London a lot because just again, it's 29% of the freight that goes through London. And there's a lot of automation in London, right? So BA has a basically an automated warehouse. And so if something goes wrong in that warehouse, that freight could be lost for 6 months, right? And so you need people to be able to solve that problem because it's not a normal problem. It doesn't happen every day or even every month. But when it does happen, it's very painful. So I think people become more of a problem solver than a doer, if you will, as a freight forwarder.
You've said you've been in logistics now for around, I think you said 30 years or so. So
Too
what,
long.
what's what's one myth around the industry that you wish you could bust for good?
One myth that we're all rich or that it doesn't matter, right? I guess I'm not sure if I put a lot of thought into that concept or that question, but I do realize that there's value in logistics, and the myth that anybody can do it is just not true, right? It is much more complex or as complex as most businesses or most processes, and it works well because of the people that are doing it. So you may think it's easy because they make it look easy, doesn't make it easy.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. If you could give your 1990s self one bit of advice from 2025, what would it be?
1990. Oh, wow. Man, there's a lot of mistakes between then and now. Trust the process, right? I hear that a lot, particularly now in raising money through VCs is trust the process, trust that it only takes one, and have patience. Patience is one of those things where I don't mean don't have a sense of urgency, but enjoy the moment, right? Enjoy the that process of this is part of the game. It's not about the finish line. It is about the process. And I think that the reason I say that now is really more about, my kids are now older, right? So my kids are, you know, I have grandkids. My
Yeah.
youngest is 23, he's getting married. And you look back as a kid, it's like, all those pain that we had raising kids, right? Of, the late nights or the struggles of paying for stuff or whatever. You look back and it's like, man, I should have spent more time and enjoyed that, right? I should have enjoyed the struggles we had because you look back at it and it's really the joyful time in our life, right? So I think that with my career as well, it's like I look back at some of the things I've done from building, vendor managed inventory in El Paso and becoming the number one in the company worldwide and watching a lot of my peers that are now, senior VPs of that corporation, it gives me a lot of joy to understand or to see that and how I was a part of their success. And we don't always notice that at the time, I guess is my long-winded story. And I can get pretty deep on that. So I'm going to quiet at that now.
Okay. Okay. Are there any books or films or documentaries or anything like that that you found particularly inspiring when thinking about sustainability or leadership?
Leadership, I would say Freakonomics. It's an old book. Freakonomics and Good to Great are probably my two kind of leadership books that I watch. And then from a sustainability standpoint is a Give to Grow. Um, book by Mo Brunel, I think is his last name. And you may not think that it's tied to sustainability, but it's how do we give to get back, right? So how do we give to for our environment? How do we give to be sustainable? And we know that we're going to get something back in return. Like we don't do it because we're going to get something back, but you do it because it's the right thing to do.
Okay, fair enough. Left field question. If you could have any person or character, alive or dead, real or fictional, as a champion for sustainable air freight, who would it be and why?
Huh. That is an off the wall question. For me, it'd be someone in the probably someone in football. You know, if you
Okay.
could have like a Packer, I'm a Green Bay Packer fan / owner, so if you could have one of my beloved Donald Driver or Brett Favre type guys, that would be fantastic. Um, but the reality of it is, you really have to get the why behind it, right? I tell my salespeople all the time, nobody likes it to be told that they're dumb, right? Or they're stupid, right? So you can't tell them exactly why this is the issue, right? And if you don't believe it, you're just dumb, right? Nobody likes that, right? So we have to figure out a better way, in my opinion, to weave it into economics, right? To weave it into the value of their life today, not 1,000 years from now or 10 years from now, whatever math you want to use there, but how is it important to today and champion that, right? And how can people be, again, remove the friction, right?
We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Chris. Is there any question I did not ask that you wish I did, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
I don't necessarily have a question. I do have it's more of a statement that we're better together, right? If we can figure out our ways to communicate, if we could really have honest conversations or honest debate on what the issues are, I think we'll be better off.
All right. Chris, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
They can go to our website, which is airconai.com. They can also email me at sales@airconai.com. We'll get to me. Obviously, LinkedIn. We have all the different channels that people can reach out to me. But love to chat, love to help, and if we can help you in any way, we're absolutely here to do that.
Fantastic. Chris, that's been fascinating. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
All right, Tom, I appreciate you and I appreciate the time today.